The COVID shots have negative efficacy after 6 months. Tell me how a shot with negative efficacy is saving lives and it has the worst side effect profile of any vaccine in human history. So how exactly is a vaccine with the worst side effects and negative efficacy saving lives? That's a preposterous claim. What ended the COVID pandemic was the Omicron variant that was more transmissible but less lethal. The vaccine, how many people it helped? I think it's an open debate. It could be a net negative.
I think Mr. Sirius kind of covered the 154 million, which was the first time I heard that. And again, I would call that propaganda. It's not science. I mean, somebody's got some model, fine. I mean, I can play with numbers too. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you how you can use numbers. Dr. Scott, you talked about the Commonwealth estimate of 3.2 million lives saved here in the U.S. in 2021 and 2022, correct? You're pretty confident of that one?
It's one of a few studies. Yep, these estimates are not easy to make, but yeah, that's one study.
Define study. I mean, were there confidence intervals around that 3.2 million?
It was a modeling study, yeah. It was
published on a blog, wasn't it? Is that correct, Mr. Siri?
Yeah, it's a blog.
That study was covered on a...
Yeah, the Commonwealth quote-unquote study is not a study, it's a blog. It's not a peer-reviewed study, it's not in a journal, it was published on a blog.
Let's put up this little chart that I'm somewhat famous for charts. So let's look at real data. So this is CDC data. So in 2019, total deaths in the U.S. were 2.85 million. Okay, then we had the pandemic year, 2020, 3.38 million, a little under 3.4 million. So that's an increase of a little more than 500,000 people died in the first year of COVID. The following year, 3.46 million people, more people in the second year of the pandemic, 2021, when the vaccines were rolling out. And I think we were close to 70% take up of vaccines by fall of 2021, I believe.
Some of the estimates are that by the second quarter, over 60% of Americans had some form of immunity.
Then in 2022, we started backing down. Now, I think Mr. Siri kind of argues in your piece that, if the vaccines really worked, you'd think even by 2021, because those things are being rolled out pretty quick, you'd probably see those death counts come down, but they didn't. But here's the point I'm trying to make with this Commonwealth Fund study. They estimated 3.2 million people's lives were saved in 2021 and 2022. So if you add that to the actual death count, what Commonwealth Fund is assuming is that in 2021, had it not been for the vaccines, more than 5 million people would have lost their lives in America. In 2022, 4.88 million people would have lost their lives. I mean, Dr. Scott, is that even close to credible to think that we'd go from 2.85 million lives lost in 2019, have a pandemic, no vaccines? Unfortunately, the NIH was sabotaging treatment using effective generic drugs, to telling people, don't treat at all, go home, be afraid, hope you don't have to go in the hospital where they'll plug remdesivir in your veins and hook you up to a ventilator and you probably never come off, okay? So we had no treatment, had 3.38 million people die that year. Are we really supposed to believe the next year we were going to leap up to 5 million lives lost in America? And then the following year, close to 5 again? Because that's what you'd have to be. In order to save 1.6 million lives in 2021 and 2022, you'd have to be assuming the death rate was going to go from 2.85 million in 2019, 3.4 million in 2019, and then leap up to 5 million in 2021 and 22. Is that at all plausible? Do you believe that? Do you believe that we were literally, had it not been for the vaccine, 5 million Americans would have lost their lives in 2021 and 2022?
Yeah, I believe that's credible to me. I mean, were you on the front lines? because it was awful. I honestly cannot express how terrible it was.
It was terrible.
And there was a dramatic,
It was
decline.
It was terrible in 2020. And the total death toll was
decline in
3.4
death
million.
rates after the vaccines were rolled out.
Dramatic. Let's move on. Let's move on to some other.
Parse over these modeling studies, but let's talk about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. I mean, there were a number of studies that looked into that. Some of which I was involved in.
This is about research. I'm by the way, I'm happy to invite you back when I'll have Dr. McCulloch and I have Dr. Good. We'll do that. Okay, we will absolutely have you come back.
Thank you.
And we'll talk about hospital protocols. We'll talk about early treatment. I would love to do that because I've never been able to get people to actually debate or discuss this with the doctors that did have the courage and compassion to treat COVID, okay? And I appreciate you did as well. So anyway, so you think it's credible. I mean, the records show that Dr. Scott thinks, yeah, we had 5 million people die in 2021 and 2022. Mr. Siri, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I could add to that just a little bit, which is that, and this is part of my submission as well, that the data reflects that in 2020, when there was no vaccine, the vaccine was first rolled out at the end of December 2020, about 18% of folks, 17% of Americans were infected. And presumably, by the way, the weakest, most frail among us passed away in 2020. Then we get to 2021, where again the data reflects, and this is my submission, around the same percentage of Americans were again infected. Okay, so no vaccine, like you pointed out, that was the increase. Then there was a vaccine in 2021. The vaccination rate went through sky high by the second quarter of 2021. When Delta's coming, the immunity rate, according to the data, is over 60%. But yet, all-cause mortality increases. And I'll point out one last thing about this. Remdesivir, and this is a great example of corruption.
You know what nurses call that? Run, death is near.
Well, I'll give you an example of the corruption of science with remdesivir. The way you should do a study is you come up with a study design, and then you implement it, because this way you avoid introducing bias. If you start the study and then you're like, ooh, you don't like what you're finding, and you change the study design, that introduces bias. And that is exactly what happened during the remdesivir clinical trial. The endpoints in the middle of the trial were changed by Gilead as it was going on. In fact, we wrote to Dr. Fauci specifically about that. That is precisely what you should never do. It introduces bias so they can get the results.
By the way, do you remember how many people had some kind of financial conflict of interest, the people that approved that with Gilead?
Yes.
It's like 9 out of 16 or something like that.
It's a significant number. And obviously, there's lots of folks who've treated COVID during the pandemic, and there's lots of, you had Dr. Jordan here, for example, and he's had a clinic. I think he has dozens and dozens of clinics around the country, and he lost, as he would explain, the protocols he implemented lost very few people to COVID. I know other doctors in that similar situation using budesonide and so forth. So.
Dr. Rogers, you have something? Dr. Scott, I think you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to add to this debate. So I watched every single meeting of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices and the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee in 2021, 2022, and 2023, when all these COVID shots were being authorized for use in this country. And after a while, the CDC's own research showed that the protection from the vaccine, if any, was between months 2 and 6. And by 6 months, it showed negative efficacy. So I'm watching the hearings on my, computer screen at home. I'm yelling at the screen. The COVID shots have negative efficacy after 6 months. Tell me how a shot with negative efficacy is saving lives, and it has the worst side effect profile of any vaccine in human history. So how exactly is a vaccine with the worst side effects and negative efficacy saving lives? That's a preposterous claim. What ended the COVID pandemic was the Omicron variant that was more transmissible but less lethal. The vaccine, how many people it helped? I think it's an open debate. It could be a net negative.